Really, really delicious scent. Well, welcome to Cambridge. This is Howard's Orchids. Good to see you again. This is my Neofinetia falcata, or more correctly, as it's called now, Vanda falcata. This is one of the many, I think possibly even hundreds of slight variations on this species that have been grown in Japan, a very long history. Lots of little tiny differences in the roots, the leaves, the flowers, absolutely wonderful sort of tradition of growing this beautiful orchid. It comes from deciduous forests, so it's used to getting quite high light levels in the winter and then shadier, moist conditions in the summer. Now, most people who embrace these, and I'm going to call them Neofinetia falcatas for now, because that's what a lot of people still call them. They grow them in the traditional Japanese style. In other words, in pots with a beautiful arrangement of sphagnum moss with a recess in the bottom, so you can just sort of feel up through a hole in the bottom of the pot to see how moist or wet they are, to get just the right degree of moisture content. And that way they grow beautifully. It's very traditional. It encompasses sort of Japanese history and is very aesthetically pleasing. However, a couple of years ago I bought this one because I thought I'd have a go at growing them. And this is just the straight bog standard species. This came from the lovely people at Spicesotic Orchids here, quite near Cambridge. And they had imported it from the Far East, and it had been grown on this piece of just hardwood as a mounted orchid. Now, I know that's not the sort of way that you would normally grow them, but I thought, well, I grow a lot of orchids that are mounted, and a lot of my other vandas do really well in, well, not so much mounted, but in baskets. So I'll see how it goes. And it has done really well. I don't think it has grown quite as quickly or sort of bushed out as quickly as it would have done if it was grown in a pot. However, that suits me really well. It has produced lots of side shoots since I've had it, because it was quite a small plant. And I rather like the way it displays itself. It's a sort of very natural way of growing, and all the flowers sort of point in a particular direction. You can see that this year it's got 1, 2, 3, 4 flower spikes. So apart from being a beautiful orchid with a long tradition, the other really fantastic thing is that the scent is just absolutely wonderful. When they first opened, I would have said, when I smelt it, it smells exactly like gardenia, sort of heavy scent. Delicious, but heavy. Since then, and at different times of day, it's become much lighter. Scents are very difficult to describe, but all I can say is it's sort of jasmine-y, sort of gardenia-y, beautiful, absolutely delicious scent all through the day and during the night. So you get a fantastic amount of scent for the money. I'm going to actually acquire, now having sort of gained confidence in growing Neofinetias, because I rather thought that maybe, there's something special about them. This is the way the Japanese grow them, and that's the only way that they can be grown. That's obviously not the case, and it means that in here, where it's relatively low light levels and pretty humid most of the time, this method of growing suits them very well, because the roots are exposed to the air and they can dry out very freely. So I'm going to get some more, I think, and I'll probably grow them either mounted, certainly if they've come mounted to start with on a piece of wood, or more likely I should probably grow them the way that I successfully grow a lot of other vandas that come from higher altitudes and therefore cooler conditions. I'll just show you an example. This is my Vanda javii, Farbanzii, and you can see I've got it in a teak basket that I make, some nice big chunks of coarse bark in the middle, and that has rooted all through, rooted around the container, and is growing really well. And I've got several others of the same sort that are growing in this way really well. So I think that's what I'll do. Growing some of the different Neofinetias means that I will extend the flowering season. They're quite small plants, so they don't take up very much room. As far as I'm aware, the scent of all of them is absolutely wonderful. And some of them will be different flower colours. So if you can grow Neofinetias, I think they're fantastic orchids to grow. And this shows that you don't have to grow them in the Japanese way if you don't want to. I would add, however, that here it suits this method of growing because the humidity in here is normally very high, at least 70% and possibly into the 80%. So if you were growing indoors, I wouldn't recommend growing them this way. But certainly in a greenhouse, if you can grow other plants mounted very well, this would be one way to go. Now I've just moved the camera around to the other side of the greenhouse. This is a sort of warmer, shadier side of the greenhouse as opposed to the vandaceous plants that are sort of hanging high up, much nearer the glass. And this is where I grow some of the warmer growing Phalaenopsis species. This is my Phalaenopsis corningiana, a beautiful species Phalaenopsis. It has a really quite remarkable scent. Now, it doesn't sound very good, but I would say it smells a little bit like some sort of interior polish or maybe a bar or tablet of soap, which doesn't give it a very good write-up, but believe me, the scent is really interesting and really sort of unique. It doesn't smell anything like some of the other much sweeter sort of rose-scented Phalaenopsis. So I'm really taken with this species, and the flowers are absolutely beautiful, long-lasting, like many species Phalaenopsis. I've had this for about 2 or 3 years now, and as you can see, it's growing in a sort of circle of cork, the sort of thing that people would have to put in cages with reptiles, sort of to give them a hiding place. I went through a sort of phase a couple of years ago of trying this technique because it means that the roots can grow either on the inside, where it tends to be a bit sort of shadier and more humid, or on the outside, and then it sits in normally sits in a little tray which normally has a little bit of water in, so it just has a bit of moisture retained in the bottom. Because under here, and this is the way that I managed to grow warmer growing Phalaenopsis in a greenhouse that is really just basically intermediate, there's a sort of heated pad which runs along underneath this shelf, which for maybe 6 or 9 months of the year I have just coming on to just raise the temperature up a few degrees, and that has meant that I've been able to grow the species Phalaenopsis I wanted, like Bellina, the beautiful scented Bellina, that sort of thing. And this has done really well. Last year it produced a flower spike here, which is still on here, so I may get some more flowers later in the season with that. And then this is the new flower spike that it's grown this year. Now I just wanted to finish up with this Brassovola bahiensis, or more correctly, Brassovola cebolleta. And there's nothing to smell now, and that's because it's one of the many night-scented orchids. And at the moment, in the greenhouse, I've got a lot of things that are beautifully scented. And come the evening, I have this one, and this one, which is Brassovola perinnii. And between them, they produce a cocktail of absolutely delicious sweet scent every evening and during the night. The Brassovola cebolleta has a very sweet sort of scent, very much based on vanilla. The Brassovola perinnii has a more interesting, in a way, lighter, more sort of rich sort of scent. As you can see, both of these are grown quite high up. This one is, really up there. That's where it lives all the time. The same for this other species, which lives over the other side, right up near the glass, so that the foliage can get as much light as possible. This one is in a plastic basket with bark chips in it. And this one is mounted, and it's actually on a succession of the small mount that I bought it on quite a few years ago. Then I put it on a larger mount, and then most recently this much larger piece of cork. So I find mounted orchids very easy to look after. You don't have to keep repotting them every year, and they can stay on the same mount for quite a few years. They also display very naturally, I think. And in here, where it's quite humid, sometimes a bit too humid a lot of the time, which suits my other things like coleogenes very well, but for these orchids that like to dry out quite quickly, it can be a bit of a risk, especially in the winter. Anyway, so thank you very much for watching this episode. I hope you found it interesting and enjoyable, and hope to see you in the next one.